morning. It's News from the Roots on Mountain Stream TV. I'm Avram Friedman, and this is Monday, February 5th, 2018. And I have Chelsea White with us this morning. Chelsea is, you've gone through a few changes in your employment and in your activities.
Yes.
I understand you're getting involved in the Poor People's Campaign now.
Yes.
Please tell us about that and some of the activities that you have planned and what's going on.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks for having me. It's been a wild year, as I think it has been for most of us since, about November of 2016. So most recently I've been working with Down Home, North Carolina, and we're actually, we're located in 2 counties in North Carolina right now, Haywood County being one of them where I work. But we are a member of the statewide steering committee for the Poor People's Campaign, which is composed of various organizations and members of the clergy in various faiths across the state and across the nation. So Down Home, North Carolina, we have a few different issues that we're working on that came out as a result of a community survey that we did where we just knocked on over 1,000 doors in the county and asked folks what was most important to them and what they would like to see happen. And so the Poor People's Campaign, we felt, was very aligned with people's main concerns. And it was the interconnecting force of where all of those issues joined together in the midst of poverty and racism and a war economy, right? Mm-hmm. And so we felt like it was very in line with our mission, which is to lift up the voices of poor folks and rural folks to be a part of the Poor People's Campaign. So right now, we are in a phase of the campaign where we are really trying to raise awareness and educate the public about the origins of the Poor People's Campaign as a part of Dr. Reverend Martin Luther King Jr.'s vision, and then the current context for the campaign. And so Asheville has a Poor People's Town Hall coming up on Thursday.
This coming Thursday?
This coming Thursday.
February 7th or 8th?
Yes.
Today's the 5th, no, so it'll be the 8th, I guess.
Yes, that's right. Yes, the 8th. And I believe it's from 7 to 9 at Hill Street Baptist Church in Asheville.
Where's that?
It's like right off of the highway. And if you plug in Hill Street Baptist Church, it'll actually...
Oh, Hill Street, you said. Yes, I know where that is. Okay. It's in Montford, on the edge of Montford community.
Exactly,
right.
Yes. And it's actually, I think, on one of the ramps to get on the highway, the churches. So, and then we are planning one right now. It's not completely finalized. We just had our first planning meeting to have one for Haywood County and potentially far west. Like, we want to invite folks from Jackson, Swain, even Cherokee and Graham if they're willing to travel that far, and Macon, of course. And we are planning to have it on March 5th, which is the 50th anniversary of the crossing of the Selma Bridge.
Oh, okay.
And we are locking down a location, but we're thinking we're going to have it like 6 to 8 so working folks can join us. And essentially we want to use this as an opportunity for working folks to really give a testimony to their experience with poverty, poor folks and working folks, and their experience with racism, whether they're members of the Latino community, or whether it's religious discrimination. Actually, one of my friends in Henderson, who's a member of the Jewish community there, they're considering their school makeup days for all of this snow happening, and they're considering Saturdays as one of those. And she's very heavily practicing in the Jewish community, and so that is a serious violation of her rule to value that Sabbath day. Yeah. And so just raising awareness for these little and big issues that people aren't realizing are happening in our own community, and these acts of oppression and discrimination, and been inviting folks of various faiths to also give their historical context to the Poor People's Campaign, like I mentioned. So hopefully we'll have some speakers lined up for that soon.
So I know that Dr. King started the Poor People's Campaign as such. And as I understand it, when he was assassinated in 1968, nobody filled that position until now, when Reverend Barber is filling that position on a national level and starting that campaign up again. and it's always bothered me that you don't hear a lot about the plight of the poor in the United States of America.
Right. Yeah.
You know, it's just something we don't like to think about. It's you know, there are people living in not only living in the streets but dying in the streets. There are people on nights like last night where people freeze to death in different parts of the United States of America because they have no place to go. And it's just something we don't like to think of. It's not something that you see on television, you know, well, we're all watching the Super Bowl game or whatever else. You know, you don't see any ads about poor people dying in the streets or starvation happening in the United States. But food insecurity is a real issue to a large percentage of the population. Why is that?
I mean, I think it's very intentional, right? Like, I think it's very intentional for the same reasons that I think led to the assassination of Dr. King. In that when you begin to talk about poorness and when you begin to talk about poverty and the many ways that we are all impacted by poverty, and when you begin to unite the folks who are affected by it, then it becomes a real threat to those who hold power, to those who have wealth because of the power that they hold, because there are so many of us who do struggle in poverty. And I think especially in areas like Western North Carolina, part of the reason that we wanted to be a part of this is because I think our whole community out here is impacted by it. I mean, food insecurity is one of the things I know that, like, at least 1 out of every 4 children in Jackson County alone is suffering from food insecurity. We have one homeless shelter that serves the far west 7 counties pathways, and it is a Christian-based shelter. And so it's just very, like, the shelter also does not even take children. So it's very disparaging to think about how our community is suffering, like you said, and no one is talking about it. But what I found uplifting is that when we do start to talk about it, because everyone can relate to poverty, they have seen it, they have been a part of it, it's very easy for folks of all different backgrounds and lifestyles to hop behind something like the Poor People's Campaign.
Well, it is for people who perhaps aren't in poverty, but for people who are in the depths of poverty. I mean, it's hard to tell somebody to go out and vote when they're hungry.
Right.
When they don't have a car to drive there, you know, I mean, that's not the first thing on their mind. They're in survival mode. They're not thinking about the greater picture in a sense. I think most people in poverty, and there are exceptions, I know, but I mean, how do we deal with that? You know, I mean, and isn't it true that in a sense, I think people are kept on the edge of poverty. A large percentage of the population is intentionally kept on the edge of poverty because I think that the people who are controlling our political system don't want them to get organized, don't want them to get involved in the political system. They're afraid of them uniting and forming a political force.
That's exactly right. That's exactly what I was going to say in response to that, was that's another strategy, along with keeping it silenced by silence from being talked about by big media when we could be talking about more important things like war and money and Wall Street. I think there's also that strategy of if we keep everyone chasing for crumbs, then they don't have time to worry about what we are doing behind the scenes that keeps them chasing for crumbs. But I can give you, I mean, I think here's like a little personal story. We were talking about the mini job switches before we went live. And, you know, I graduated in 2016 with 2 bachelor's degrees from Western. And I was still waiting tables when I got out of college. And I was not making enough money to pay my bills. So I picked up a second job as a cashier. And this all the while being told, like, I was so frustrated. And I was, of course, talking to everyone about, like, I can't find any good jobs, or like there's so many stipulations, like you have to have so much experience and blah blah blah.
So you probably had student debt to deal with
exactly.
as well. Yeah.
And everyone's answer was really like, well, you can find a job, you just have to go to like Durham or Raleigh or Winston-Salem or Charlotte. And I was like, well, that's not what I want to do. My family's here, my roots are here. And then we had the whole candidates withdrawing and losing my job thing. And in the midst of all of that, my partner was in a car accident, and the only vehicle that we had between us. So here I am, you know, like jobless, we have no car, and we're thinking like, how are we even gonna like survive this? And I think when you reach this point, a lot of folks in poverty, and I say all of that, like we got out of it, obviously. I'm very fortunate that we survived. I have a car, and I have a great support system that I'm lucky that a lot of folks don't have access to. But I say all of that because I think you reach a point where you just have to get angry. And I think a lot of people who are poor folks do reach that point. And I've been angry for a while because I've seen it happening for a while, but you reach this point where you're just like, this is not fair. And if I have everything laid out for me, I have 2 college degrees, I have a great family, I have a great community who I know a lot of people within, what about everyone who doesn't have all of that, right? Like, I have no children. What if I had a kid to also worry about on top of that, you know? And
medical bills, all of that.
Yeah, and you just start, I think once it breaks the point where it's no longer about voting, right? It becomes about, like, even when I vote, it's not changing the bottom line for families. And it becomes a point where it's like, even when I vote, poor folks' voices aren't getting lifted up to a point where, like, why are we in a position where you have to have a car to work? If you are poor, you have any problems with your car, you can't get to work, you become poorer, you get laid off because you can't get to work. You commit a
downward spiral.
It's a downward spiral.
Yeah.
You commit a petty crime if you can't afford to get your tag renewed on your car. You get a petty crime, and then you have to pay a fine because of that petty crime, and then it's more of a downward spiral, right? And so I think what the conversations that I've had with folks about the Poor People's Campaign, and even just about down home North Carolina, when we were doing this community survey and we knocked on people's doors and we were asking, what matters to you and your family? Is it really the 1%, or is it more like keeping a roof over your head? Is it more like having a job that pays you enough money to afford health care because they don't give you health care? And people, one of the things that people would say was just, wow, like no one's bothered to ask these questions before, right? Mm-hmm. And so then when you start to have these conversations, and it becomes less about, we need you to go vote for our candidates because X, Y, and Z, and it becomes about, like, what can we do together to change this broken system that's keeping both of us from living our best lives? And people really feel validated by that, and they feel they can see a path to change, and they can see how they can contribute to that path to change. But I think that we were talking a little bit about the Durham thing earlier too, and I think that it goes back to this conversation about, like, when you are in a system that doesn't work for you to start with, then the conversation isn't about, like, well, I need to contribute to that system more by voting or by, like, playing by the rules or whatever it is. It becomes about, like, well, where are the broken pieces in this system, and where can we start to really change it in ways that people aren't telling us we can change it because they don't want us to know about.
Right, yeah. I think the strategy in general is to make people feel powerless.
Exactly.
You know, but we are not powerless, but you have to realize that in order to do that, and it's a job to do that. But I mean, it's striking to me, you know, when you look at television and they talk about the state of the economy, and they tell you, well, the stock market isn't really growing, you know, it's a great economy. And it's true, the economy, in a sense, is great. There's a lot of wealth that is being generated right now, but it's all going to the top. Mm-hmm. And in the meantime, you know, if you don't have any money, if you're struggling, you don't have health care, you don't have food to put on the table, you're wondering whether you're going to buy medicine or food or pay the rent, you know, you're living in a recession or a depression all the time.
Yes, exactly.
You know, it doesn't matter whether they call it that on the television or in the newspaper, you know. it's all, it's personal.
Exactly.
And what do we have to do to reverse this transfer of wealth that has taken place in this country over the last 20 or 30 years? And that's exactly what's happened. I mean, real wages have gone down,
Absolutely.
not up. Which means that we each have less buying power now than we did 30 years ago, or many people do. Maybe most people do. People can save less money. It used to be the American dream for people to put money in the bank, save, buy a house, and all
Right.
that. Get a college education and maybe go on and get a master's and a doctorate degree. Very, very few. There's a smaller pool of people, smaller and smaller, who are able to do those things. I guess the shrinking middle class is what you would call it, But what can we do as individuals and in working together to achieve, to reverse that whole process?
I mean, I think that it starts with transferring power, which is a long. I want to premise this by saying it's a long road. It starts by having these types of conversations with folks, like bottom up grassroots conversations, and I mean like the slow kinds, the kinds where you may talk to someone and they could be on the complete opposite of the political spectrum and have no idea what you even mean by the 1%. And the first time that you talk to them, it may just be understanding that. And then the second time that you talk to them, it may be starting to plant the seeds. But I think that for every person that we take the time to get to know, to build relationships with, to understand their values and their beliefs, I think that that's the only way that we can circumvent all of these narratives and all of these strategies that are being used to make people feel powerless, and to make people feel like their energy is best spent elsewhere. I think that it really is like when you lift up people's voices, it starts small, and it just starts by giving them your own ears and then starting to find opportunities for their story to connect with other folks' stories in a way that we've really been prevented from because we've been so isolated and because we've been told each man for himself, you just have to survive at this point. One of the young women that we knocked on the door of for Down Home, she's just a little older than me, she's 25, and she is, her name is Sam Wiles, and she's amazing, first of all, but she's completely blind, and she lives independently.
She's blind, you said?
Completely blind, yes. Lives independently, and when we knocked on her door, she's one of the folks who said, wow, no one's ever bothered to ask me these things before. But we could kind of tell right away that there was something about her that, like, if we just kept talking, she just had this spark in her energy. And we were right, once we started talking to her, she had just this real natural, like, leadership and readiness about her. And so we talked to her about some of the things that are most important to her, talked to her about the cost of rent compared to what you get for SSI when you live on a fixed income. And then we talked about Duke Energy trying to raise utility rates by 16% to clean up their coal ash spill, which for most folks it's like Duke Energy, monopoly, like if you're living in this paycheck to paycheck life, exactly, right over your head. So when we talked to Sam about this, she's like, well, that's not right, that's not fair. We told her about the comments by the CEO of Duke who said, if you can't afford the $20, take a cold shower, is what she said.
I didn't hear that, but that's let them eat cake, isn't it, basically, yeah. Interesting.
Yeah.
Did she really say that?
Yes. It was, really? I'll email you a press thing.
Okay. Take a cold shower.
You can take a cold shower if you can't afford $20 extra a month. And so we collected 1,500 signatures by literally standing in parking lots outside of Walmart, by knocking door to door and taking signatures in Waynesville at apartment buildings and everything else. And online, of course, we use social media to collect signatures. And then Miss Sam Wiles went to the Duke Energy hearing in Asheville and presented those 1,500 signatures as evidence against Duke Energy and shared her story as a testimony, saying when you live on a fixed income, just because Duke Energy wants more money doesn't mean that you magically make more money, and that she doesn't deserve to take a cold shower just because of her situation. And so I think it's terrible, and it's also like, that's what happens when we bother to take the time to talk to somebody, right? Like, had we not bothered to take the time to just talk to Sam Wiles, then no one probably would have invited her to share that moment in that hearing. And the thing about these hearings that gets me is that we have a lot of lawyers and we have a lot of environmental scientists who are ready with the numbers to get up there and tell you the facts about how all of what Duke Energy is doing is wrong. And yet the people on like these utilities commissions and the people in these public positions, they've heard it all before and like they don't care. And so it's so important
because they come from Duke Energy.
They come from Duke Energy, right? But when we can bring voices like Sam Wiles into the public eye and have public outcry and unity and solidarity with folks like Sam Wiles, then we create a whole new narrative that's beyond just the facts and numbers, right? It gives a face to those facts and numbers. And I think that that's how we end up, I mean, the wealth thing, like the 1%, that's a huge macro issue, right? But I think it starts by many, many Sam Wiles all over Haywood County, all over Jackson County, and then eventually through the Poor People's Campaign, all over North Carolina, and then all over the nation. Even in the wake of the death of Dr. King, they still managed to put up Resurrection City and keep it alive for 40 days, 30 of which it was raining, regardless, and I think that we don't hear about that as often as we should, and it should have made a bigger impact, but I think that now, in the wake of this energy that we're seeing in our country, and I think in the wake of having conversations like we need to be having with neighbors like Sam Wiles, then it is so possible to do something even bigger than Resurrection City was 50 years ago through the Poor People's Campaign. And if we can do that on a national level, then that's how we start to tackle these really big issues like bringing wealth back down, bringing power back down.
So is that being planned? Is there another Resurrection City being planned in D.C. or any place?
I don't know the details.
Okay.
I do know that we are planning to unite voices of poor folks. And so folks will need to come to the town hall, and we'll be talking about the next steps of the Poor People's Campaign at the town hall. But they can be expecting moral resistance this summer at state capitals all across the nation. And folks can get involved in that in whatever capacity that they are able to in their lives right now. So whether they want to be a full-blown organizer helping us put together events, or if they want to do a one-day show up at a rally kind of thing.
So how many people are actually organized or are involved in Down Home, North Carolina, and in the local Poor People's Campaign? So
like I said, we just started with our local planning. So in Haywood County, we had 9 folks show up to our first planning committee for the Poor People's Campaign. And it was in an apartment. It was no big thing. In Down Home, we have, I think, around 50-some official members. And so we are an actual, we are a C3, so we have dues-paying membership in Down Home.
But what you mentioned that you knocked on over 1,000 doors in Haywood County? And how many people were involved in doing that?
So that we did a 2-week-long paid canvass where we invited members of the community who were looking for short-term employment or who were looking to help with something like this. We also had volunteers join us, and that's when we knocked on the 1,000 doors, was within that 2 weeks. And so we had, I think, between our volunteers and me, I would say 7 folks total over the course of 2 weeks who helped us knock doors.
That's a lot of work for 7 people.
Yeah.
And you said that you pay some people. There are some people on staff. Is that money that you've gotten from a grant or from?
From multiple grants,
Ma-
yes,
multiple
and
grants?
from multiple foundations. Currently, we are being fiscally sponsored by People's Action, but we're looking to become independent within the next year, which is why we're a dues-paying organization.
People's Action. I'm not familiar with that. Is that a national organization?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. Or People's Action Fund is what it's called.
Mm-hmm.
And so they essentially are incubating us until we can. While we get grants, they help us with kind of like the bottom line administrative stuff while we become an independent organization.
And so is this at all affiliated with the NAACP? And
The Poor People's Campaign?
Yes.
They were there at our planning meeting.
Okay.
So it's multiple groups that are working together to bring this to life.
Is the Jackson branch involved? Does Enrique know about this?
He knows about it for sure. It was the Haywood County chapter that was there at our meeting yesterday, or not yesterday, this past week. But Enrique does know about it, and like we've been telling them, we definitely want folks from Jackson County and Swain County to be involved, or if folks in the far west want to hold an additional town hall, however we can support, we'd be more than happy to do that as well, because I think we should have this everywhere.
So I'll ask you again at the end, but for that, would you just tell our audience how people can get in touch with you or get involved? Is there a web page, a Facebook page?
Mm-hmm. So specifically, you can sign up for the Poor People's Campaign at poorpeoplescampaign.org. And if you sign up there, I will actually get your contact information, reach out to you personally. And if you are in like Haywood or surrounding areas. And then you can reach me at my email address, which is Chelsea, CHELSEA, at downhomenc.org. And that's our website, downhomenc, like North Carolina, .org. And then also, I would love for people to just call or text me. If they want to get involved, I have something for you to do right away. We can knock on doors. Down Home is working on a lot more than just the Poor People's Campaign as well. We have working groups that are dedicated to the main issues that came out of that survey. So we have one that is dedicated specifically to jobs and wages in Haywood County, one that's specifically dedicated to affordable housing, so tackling both homelessness as well as the just housing crisis in Western North Carolina, affordable housing crisis, and then the opioid crisis and healthcare are the other ones. So we've been, we also are working with the North Carolina Harm Reduction Coalition with our opioid working group, and we got 40 free naloxone kits, which is the drug that you can use to counter an overdose temporarily while you wait for like an ambulance if you've called 911. So if someone is potentially on the verge of death, like you can keep them on the line until an ambulance gets there. So we've been knocking on doors actually and distributing those to folks. And so far we have a 100% success rate. Everyone who's opened the door has wanted to have one on hand just in case of an emergency. So we know that the opioid crisis has been overtaking Western North Carolina rampantly. And so we think it's really important for everyone in our community to be prepared in case of an emergency. You never know if you could be the person who makes the difference before the ambulance gets there. So far, everyone who's answered the door for us has wanted one, which has been awesome. And it works just like an EpiPen, so it's pretty easy to use. You essentially just fill the syringe and stab them in a muscle.
Over the counter?
Yeah, like I said, we got it free. We just track the kits so that we can recycle them when they've been used, and make sure that since it is like medical equipment, it's being taken care of properly.
But this is not, you can't go to the drugstore and buy naloxone.
Yeah, but it's really expensive.
Oh, you can?
Mm-hmm.
It's over without a prescription?
I don't actually know.
Okay, yeah, all right.
That's a really good question. But I do know that it's really expensive to get without a group. So the North Carolina Harm Reduction Coalition has been working to make it accessible, and so we worked with them to get these kits.
I know that there was a group working on a group of social workers. You know Garrett Lagan, I guess, who was trying to get the various different police forces in Western North Carolina to have naloxone on hand. Mm-hmm. And there was some resistance, although I understand that now the Sheriff's Department in Jackson County is doing that, but not the local police, unfortunately.
I think they definitely should be. I know that EMS only carries one on them unless they have a personal kit, like an official. They only have one official kit per truck.
Yeah.
Waynesville is just now starting a diversion program where they are looking, if they find someone who's committing a crime that's related to substance abuse, instead of locking them away, they send them to treatment. So that's a great step in the right direction.
That is.
And hopefully, so maybe that's a good sign that we can start working on these projects like what Garrett is doing and maybe get a little bit more support behind it. Because I was honestly expecting more resistance behind distributing the kids. I expected folks to be like, well, I know that there's a lot of stigma around addiction, and so I expected there to be more judgment or more expression of that. And I was really, really happy to see that folks are really understanding around the fact that folks have to be alive if they're going to get better. And so it made me really happy to be a part of a community that wanted to support that idea. Yeah.
A progressive step forward. You had mentioned you working with wages, local wages. Now, maybe you can answer this for us. When HB 2 passed in the state, the infamous bathroom law, it was a lot more than a bathroom law.
Yes,
one of the things was that it sought to control or to limit what local communities could do on many issues, and one of them, as I understand it, was it prohibited local communities from raising the minimum wage higher than the state level. However, so HB 2 has been at least partially rescinded as a result of a law, as a result of the General Assembly rescinding it, rescinded. Was that aspect of the law rescinded? So that's still intact, really? The Democrats went along with that, huh?
It's a tricky thing, yeah. We are actually one of very few states who has a law in place that prevents local governments from
raising a local minimum wage.
From essentially raising or regulating local businesses in any way. I mean, like from raising wages to bathroom requirements, that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And it's really tricky. So part of what we are doing is fighting for higher statewide minimum wages.
Right.
We are working alongside of Fight for 15 and our Walmart, which is working to create a retail and fast food industry union, which would be amazing. And so essentially a lot of what we're doing is also just like supporting them and whatever we can, like recruiting working folks. And then also pushing our local legislators to fight against the law that's in place that prevents them from passing a minimum wage. And then also pushing them to at least pass ordinances that that stipulate a living wage for the employees of the government. So for instance, Canton employees, they work for the town of Canton. Canton is living wage certified. So all of the employees of the town of Canton, so if they work for Ingalls and Canton, that doesn't count. But like if they work for like the water portion of the town of Canton or anything like that.
Yeah, then this law guarantees them
a living wage.
How is a living wage defined?
If it's being defined by Just Economics, which are our friends in Asheville who fight for living wages, then it is essentially, I think, they have a few different formulas, but it works along the lines of the costs of living by using the average cost of housing, average cost of utilities for like a 4-person family, and then like compares that to the poverty rates, and they do some kind of math, or not poverty rates, but the poverty line, and then they do some kind of math in there. But essentially a living wage in this case, I believe, is around $15 an hour.
So somehow they got around HB2, or they got around the limitations that were put on the state government?
It's essentially, if you look at the government like a business, they're saying we pay our employees a living wage. They can't require anyone who does business within the town to pay a living wage. So
it's only in private industry that the government, according to the state government, can't mandate a minimum wage.
Right, exactly. Well, because technically the local government, they decide on their budget, right? So if they are deciding that they're going to pay all of their employees a living wage, then they can do what they please. So pushing, if the town of Canton has that in place, which they do right now, then pushing more like into Waynesville so that then it can become a countywide thing, and then pushing more counties to do it. And then at least we're securing our local government employees with a living wage while we can continue to push for the fight for a statewide minimum wage to be raised.
Great point.
Yeah. So it's a lot of fights going on. Like I said, it's the long game. We're just trying to be really strategic about how we can lift up folks' voices in a way that's really effective and is still keeping those big end goals in sight and is making sure that we're taking steps towards those.
Yeah, it strikes me, how so many different issues are converging.
Oh yeah.
Right now, and it's making for this grand coalition. Like the Canary Coalition is an environmental organization, but we're certainly getting involved in environmental justice issues, especially with the Atlantic Coast Pipeline issue now, where the Duke Energy actually moved the proposed location of the pipeline from a more affluent area to a more rural and poor area, mostly made up of Lumbee Indians and black people, both who own farmland and whose land is getting impacted. And this isn't the first time I've talked about this on the air, but there's so many different issues converging now. When we go to a women's march in Asheville, it's not just women that are participating, and it's also environmental groups. It's also people working on civil rights issues and income disparity issues. And when you go to a climate march, it's the same coalition of people. Like we went to this incredible march, I think it was in 2014, I guess, in New York. There were 400,000 people showed up for a climate march.
That's amazing.
And represented were gay and lesbian groups and religious organizations and women's groups and civil rights organizations. It's the same coalition that seems to be building, and the Moral Monday movement. That's what it's all about too, and the Poor People's Campaign, And,
yes.
I mean, it's because all of these issues, climate change is going to impact poor people more than anybody else. It is already impacting the poor people more than anybody else. So it's really just one big movement that's developing, and that is the power of the people. That's the way social change has always occurred throughout our history. We're led to believe that we're powerless again. That we, as people, what can you do against these tremendous economic interests that are controlling our government right now? The fact is that time and time and time again throughout our history, we've confronted these same forces and won.
That's right. That's right.
Every time, the abolitionist movement, the women's rights and suffrage movement, the forming labor unions, which were once illegal in the United States of America, is because...
And they're working to try and make them illegal again.
Well, they're trying, and they really have depleted, but only because we're living through such an affluent period of history, I think.
Yeah.
I think that labor unions are again beginning to gain traction, and that's what we need to do. I think labor is central to this whole thing.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think that's exactly right. All of these issues are so interconnected. And when we start to see another strategy that they're using is that us versus them narrative. But the truth is that there is no me versus you. We're impacted by the same issues. And I think you hit the nail on the head when you say that, like, environmental issues impact poor folks and rural folks more. We know how it is out here in the mountains for sure. And then poverty, there's a feminization of poverty. So poverty is a woman's issue, and women's issues are class issues, and class issues are also health issues, and it is all so interrelated. And I think we're reaching a point in history where we can't ignore that anymore, and where they can't keep dividing us into these categories anymore.
And it does. It impacts everyone, whether you consider yourself poor or not. when you have poor people who can't afford health care insurance, I do sometimes myself. I don't go see a doctor when I should see a doctor in the beginning, and there's a lot of people, who do that. Well, I'll just ride this out, and so as a result, many thousands of people are allowing various diseases to manifest themselves in their bodies, and that's ending up costing the system much more money than if they used preventative measures, and that just are not available for economic reasons. It doesn't make sense for anybody, no matter how wealthy you are. And and what you end up having is flu epidemics, like that's what's happening now. And if you think it doesn't matter how much money you have, if you get that flu, you could die, and your children and grandchildren can die, and so don't think that poverty is something you're isolated from just because you're not personally living in poverty.
That's right.
So much for my soapbox.
I love it. I'm just like, yes, preach. It's amazing.
But yeah, well, this is great work you're doing, Chelsea, and I hope that it continues. And again, let's tell people how they can get involved, and if there's anything else that you have to say that I've cut you off from or anything.
No, not at all. Just follow us on social media, Down Home, North Carolina. We have a Haywood-specific page, which is Down Home Haywood chapter.
Right.
And then, like I said, email me so I can get you involved. And then if you want to be a part of the Poor People's Campaign, make sure to sign up on their website, poorpeoplescampaign.org.
Well, are you having a presence at the HK&J march that's coming up, the Moral March on Raleigh, on next Saturday, February 10th?
So unfortunately, we are not busing folks out there or anything, but I'm definitely going to be inviting our members to join the Jackson County NAACP.
Okay, well that's what I was going to say. Please feel free to send people our way, because we are taking the bus. It's $50 round trip, but if you can't afford that, we have scholarship money available, and we have about 20 empty seats right now. It's a 55-passenger bus, and anybody who's out there, please consider coming to Raleigh next Saturday morning at 3 o'clock in the morning at the Justice Center. But we'll be going and coming back at the same day.
Okay.
And we need people to fill up that bus, whether you have the $50 or not.
Okay.
So please send people our way, and you're certainly welcome to join us.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I will definitely reach out to some folks. And then just for the listeners, too, since we do work with a lot of working folks, poor folks, and families, do y'all need help with the scholarship portion of that? If folks can contribute to the scholarship portion?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, we do need money.
Do that?
Okay, thank you. By calling the Canary Coalition, that we're handling the bus and the making reservations. So call us at 828-631-3447 or write to info@canarycoalition.org, and you can make a reservation and we'll take care of you.
Awesome. Thank you for doing that. That's amazing.
Yeah.
Hopefully we can get some people in that bus for you.
That'd be great.
Yeah.
That'd be awesome. Yeah.
We just took a whole caravan of ladies to the State of Our Union in Washington, D.C., which was an event that was organized by many, many groups. The National Domestic Workers Alliance, People's Action was one of the sponsors of the group, Black Lives Matter, Planned Parenthood, I'm forgetting so many more. And I was so fortunate as to be able to speak at the event amongst the likes of Alicia Garza and Cecil Richards from Planned Parenthood and members of Congress, and it was amazing. So we actually took a caravan of folks from Western North Carolina and Alamance County up there for that event, and it was basically to reveal what the actual state of our union is through the eyes of women and oppressed communities in particular, as the president was giving what his perspective of lifting food was.
Oh, gosh, that was horrible. I don't know if you saw it.
No, I didn't.
I forced myself to watch it just because I wanted to see what, just that piece of history such as it is, and it's horrible. What
Yeah.
a divisive.
I did hear the sound bites of the very creepy nationalist rhetoric that was used.
Yeah, I mean, promoting hatred toward immigrants and using people who have suffered to promote that message. I mean, it was just a horrible display of demagoguery, and it was terrible and frightening. Because I lived, I was born right after World War II, and my parents being Jewish and everything, and the entire Jewish community felt like they escaped death by defeating Adolf Hitler, and there was a feeling, wow, that will never happen again, thank God, and that could never happen here. Well, it seems to be happening here. Maybe not to Jewish people, although who knows what's next in line.
Right.
Nobody is safe. It's the same thing. You may think that you're not the one that's being used as the scapegoat right now, but if somebody is, then you could be also. It doesn't matter who you are.
Who was it that wrote that poem out of World War II that said, or maybe it was a song that said, like they came for the socialists and I did not do anything because I wasn't a socialist.
I'm familiar with what you're talking about, but I'm drawing a blank on who it was. But there was a book written by, a very famous book called "It Can't Happen Here," that was turned into a play about how it could happen here. And this was back in the I guess in the 40s and 30s or 40s, and it described the politician very similar to our current Commander-in-Chief. Yeah.
Well, if you're looking for something uplifting, check out the State of Our Union.
Yeah.
But yeah, that being said, we took that caravan up there so we can hopefully get a good number of people out to Raleigh, I think, as well. That'd be great.
Yeah, that's great. Okay. Well, thank you for the work you're doing and for coming here this morning. And we'll have you back again and again to keep us updated and tell us what's going on in your battle, in our battle.
In our battle, that's right.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for having me and for letting the people see what kind of good work is going on and recruiting folks to join the cause.
Thanks, Joe.